In July 1947, a young Army lieutenant named Walter Haut typed out one of the most famous sentences in the history of the 20th century. Under direct orders from his commanding officer, he told the world that the United States military had recovered a flying saucer near the small town of Roswell, New Mexico. Within hours, the story was crushed. The military said it had all been a mistake, just a weather balloon, nothing more. And for the rest of his life, Walter Haut, a decorated combat veteran and a man his friends described as painfully honest, held the line. He would say only one thing to anyone who pressed him. He put out the press release and nothing else. But Walter Haut carried a secret. In 2002, he sat down in front of a notary and 2 witnesses and signed a sealed statement, one that was not to be opened until after he was dead. And when it was finally opened, it detailed something extraordinary. He wrote that his own commander had personally walked him into a guarded hangar on the base, and that there, with his own eyes, he had seen a metallic egg-shaped craft, and beside it, hidden beneath a tarp, the small bodies of beings that were not human. But today, in this episode of Alien Encounters, I will tell you the whole story of the case and the truth the witness revealed about the subject. Welcome. To understand what happened in the summer of 1947, you first have to understand the man at the center of it, because Walter Haut was not the kind of person who invented stories. He was born on June 3, 1922, in Chicago, Illinois. When the Second World War came, he did not sit it out. He became a bombardier in a heavy bomb group, and he flew 35 combat missions against Japan. 35. Anyone who knows anything about the air war in the Pacific knows what that number means. It means he stared death in the face again and again and kept going back up. He came home decorated, a man who had earned the trust of the men he served with. And then, in the summer of 1946, Walter Haut was chosen for something that placed him at the very heart of the most secret and dangerous work the United States was doing at that time. He took part in Operation Crossroads, the series of nuclear weapons tests conducted at Bikini Atoll in the Pacific. His job there was to drop instrument packages from aircraft, delicate scientific devices designed to record data from the atomic blasts as they detonated. Think about that for a moment. To be assigned to Operation Crossroads was to be trusted with atomic secrets, the most classified material on the planet. The military did not hand that responsibility to careless men, or to dreamers, or to liars. They handed it to disciplined officers who could be relied upon to follow orders and keep their mouths shut. That was Walter Haut. So, by 1947, when he was appointed Public Information Officer for the 509th Bomb Group at Roswell Army Airfield, he arrived with a reputation. And that base, the 509th, was no ordinary posting. This was the only atomic bomb group in the entire world at that time. These were the men who had dropped the bombs that ended the war. Roswell Army Airfield was, quite literally, the most elite and most sensitive airbase on Earth. It was not a place where sloppy mistakes happened, and it was certainly not a place where the officers could not tell the difference between a piece of military equipment and something extraordinary. Haut served directly under the base commander, Colonel William H. Blanchard. And this is an important detail, because the 2 men were not merely officer and subordinate. They were close personal friends. Blanchard trusted Haut, and Haut, in turn, was bound to Blanchard by something deeper than the chain of command. He was bound by loyalty and by an oath of secrecy that he would carry silently for the next half a century. Haut married his wife Lorraine. They had 2 daughters, Maribeth and Julie. He was, by every account of the people who knew him, an ordinary, decent, disciplined man with an unusually high sense of duty. Keep that in your mind as this story unfolds, because everything hinges on it. This is not the account of a man chasing fame. Walter Haut spent decades saying nothing. He would only speak the full truth on the condition that his own words remained locked away until he could no longer be questioned about them. Now let us go back to that first week of July 1947. It was Monday, July 7th. The 4th of July weekend had just ended, and Walter Haut returned to duty at Roswell Army Airfield like any officer coming back from a holiday. But the moment he arrived, he could feel that something was off. There was a strange energy moving through the base, the kind of quiet urgency that spreads when the men who are supposed to know something are not saying it out loud. What Haut learned, in pieces, was this. Out on the ranch land northwest of Roswell, a rancher had come across the remains of something that had fallen out of the sky. That rancher was Mac Brazel, and he had reported his discovery to the authorities. And Colonel Blanchard, rather than dismissing it, had done something significant. He had dispatched the base's own intelligence officer, Major Jesse Marcel, to go out and investigate what was lying scattered across that field. Think about what that decision alone tells us. The intelligence officer of the world's only atomic bomb group does not get sent into the desert to look at a wandering weather balloon. Blanchard sent Marcel because whatever had come down was serious enough to warrant it. Later that same day, in the late afternoon, more reports began to filter in. This time they spoke of a second location, another crash site, this one roughly 40 miles north of Roswell. So now there were two sites, two separate places where something had fallen, and the machinery of the base quietly began to move. The next morning was Tuesday, July 8th, 1947, and this is where the heart of Walter Haut's account begins. At 7:30 in the morning, Haut attended a staff meeting led by Colonel Blanchard. This was not a routine gathering of a few junior officers. The room was full of the base's most senior men, and some who had come in from elsewhere. Around that table sat Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer who had gone out to the debris field. Beside him was Captain Sheridan Cavett of the Counterintelligence Corps. There was the operations officer, Colonel James Hopkins. There was the base adjutant, Major Patrick Saunders, the personnel officer, Major Isidore Brown, and the supply officer, Lieutenant Colonel Ulysses Nero. And crucially, there were two men who had not come from Roswell at all, Brigadier General Roger Ramey and his Chief of Staff, Colonel Thomas Dubose, had flown in from Carswell Army Airfield over in Fort Worth, Texas. Now, why does that matter? Because a brigadier general does not fly across state lines on a Tuesday morning to sit in on a meeting about a weather balloon. The presence of Ramey in that room tells you, on its own, that the events of Roswell had already climbed far up the ladder, into the highest levels of the 8th Air Force. Something had come down that was worth the attention of a general. Inside that meeting, Marcel and Cavett reported on what they had found in Lincoln County, describing a debris field that was enormous, material scattered across a wide stretch of ranch land. And Blanchard, in turn, briefed the group on the second site, the one to the north of town. Two men reporting on two crash locations in a single classified meeting at the world's only atomic bomb base. And then something was passed around that table, samples of the recovered wreckage. Walter Haut held pieces of it in his own hands. He described metallic foil, paper thin, so light it seemed like nothing, and yet incredibly strong. He tried to understand what he was looking at, a material that behaved like nothing manufactured on Earth. And there was more. There were beams, plastic-like structural pieces, and along them ran strange markings, a kind of printing in pink and purple, symbols that no one in that room could read. Writing, in an alphabet nobody recognized. Remember who was in that room. These were among the most technically knowledgeable military men in the country. They had access to the most advanced aircraft and weaponry the world had produced. And they sat there, passing around a material that none of them could identify, marked with a language none of them could read. What happened next is where the official story and Walter Haut's story split apart. As the base's public information officer, Haut had one duty that morning: to be the voice of Roswell Army Airfield to the outside world. And what he was about to be ordered to announce was unlike anything an American military base had ever put out to the public. At around 11:30 that morning, under Colonel Blanchard's direct orders, Walter Haut sat down and drafted the press release. As the public information officer, this was his job: to be the voice of the base to the public. He wrote it up, and then he personally distributed it. He carried it to the local radio stations, KGFL and KSWS, and to the newspapers, the Roswell Daily Record and the Morning Dispatch. The words in that release were unlike anything an American military base had ever put out. It announced that the 509th Bomb Group had come into possession of a flying saucer. Not a rumor of one, a captured one. The Roswell Daily Record ran it across the front page in bold letters that would become some of the most famous newsprint of the century. The 509th, the atomic bomb group, had captured a flying saucer, and for a few short hours, on July 8, 1947, the United States military officially told the world that it had a flying saucer in its possession. But before Walter Haut left the base that afternoon, something happened that he would keep locked inside himself for the next 55 years. Colonel Blanchard, his friend and his commander, came to him personally, and Blanchard took him somewhere, not sent him, took him himself. They walked to Building 84, a heavily guarded B-29 hangar known as Hangar P-3, sitting on the east side of the tarmac. This was a secure structure, watched over by armed guards, the kind of place you did not enter without authorization from the very top. And Blanchard walked Walter Haut inside. Let us pause here and let Walter Haut speak for himself, because these are his own words from the sealed affidavit he signed in 2002. He wrote, "Before leaving the base, Colonel Blanchard took me personally to Building 84. Once inside, I was permitted from a safe distance to first observe the object just recovered north of town." The object recovered north of town. The second crash site. And there it was, inside that hangar, under guard. Haut described what he saw. A craft, metallic and egg-shaped. It measured, by his estimate, somewhere between 12 and 15 feet in length and stood about 6 feet high. And here is the detail that lingers. It had no visible windows, no wings, no landing gear of any kind. It was a smooth, seamless, egg-shaped metal object, and there was nothing on it that resembled any aircraft that human beings had ever built. No cockpit glass, no propellers, no wheels, nothing to indicate how a person would sit inside it or how it was meant to fly. He was kept at a safe distance. He was not allowed to walk up and touch it. But he saw it clearly, with his own two eyes, standing in that guarded hangar in the summer of 1947, an object shaped like an egg, made of metal, that should not have existed. And that was not all he saw. In that same hangar, on the floor, Haut observed something covered by a tarp. There were bodies beneath it, and only their heads extended out past the edge of the covering. Let us again turn to his exact words from the affidavit, because they are chilling in their restraint. He wrote, "Only the heads extended beyond the covering, and I was not able to make out any features. The heads did appear larger than normal, and the contour of the canvas suggested the size of a 10-year-old child." Listen to that carefully. He was honest about the limits of what he could see. He did not describe eyes or mouths or any dramatic detail. He said plainly that he could not make out the features. But two things were unmistakable to him. The heads were larger than a normal human head, and the shape of the cover draped over the rest of the bodies told him these beings were small, roughly the size of a 10-year-old child, about 4 feet tall. Two of them, small, still, and clearly not human. They did not move. They showed no sign of life. They appeared to be deceased, and Haut was informed that a temporary morgue had been set up on the base and that the wreckage itself was not radioactive. Stop and consider the weight of that scene. A decorated combat officer, a man trusted with atomic secrets, standing inside a guarded hangar, looking at an egg-shaped craft with no wings and no windows, and beside it, two small bodies with oversized heads lying dead beneath a tarp, and then being told to go about his day and to keep quiet. That is exactly what he did. for the rest of his life. The very next day, on Wednesday, July 9th, the story was shut down. By now, Haut's announcement had gone out over the national wire services, and the sudden, uncontrolled attention it was drawing was exactly what the higher command could not allow. What had been said in haste now had to be unsaid, fast. And so, out at Fort Worth, General Ramey stepped in to bury it. In front of the assembled press, he presented them with the tattered remains of a weather balloon, the foil and sticks of a simple device, and told the reporters that this was all there had ever been. The flying disc, he assured them, had been a case of an overeager press officer and a misidentified balloon. The world, which had been electrified for a single day, exhaled and moved on. The story died almost as quickly as it had been born, and Walter Haut paid the price. He was the public information officer, the man whose name was attached to the release. When the retraction came, he was the one left holding an announcement that the military now claimed had been a foolish error. He faced ridicule, and from his superiors, he received a clear instruction: stay quiet. Do not answer questions. Let it go. So he did. For decade after decade, Walter Haut's entire public statement on the most famous UFO event in history shrank down to a single weary sentence. His daughter, Julie Schuster, would later recall that whenever anyone came to him, curious, hoping to pry something loose, he would give them the same words every time. He would say, "I put out the press release and nothing else." Think about the discipline that took. Think about the burden of it. A man who had walked into that hangar, who had seen the craft and the bodies, spending nearly 30 years, and then longer still, telling the world he had only typed up a bit of paper. He had made a promise to Colonel Blanchard. And in Walter Haut, a promise was not a small thing. For almost 30 years, the Roswell incident lay dormant, all but forgotten, filed away as one of the sillier moments of the early flying saucer craze. But in the late 1970s, researchers began to dig it back up. Chief among them was the nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman, who tracked down the surviving figures from that summer, including Major Jesse Marcel, and reopened questions that had been buried for a generation. When these researchers first came to Walter Haut, he gave them very little. He told them that his role had been minor, that he had simply distributed the announcement, and that he had seen no debris and no bodies. He stayed inside the shell he had built for himself in 1947. The oath still held. But something was shifting in him. In 1991, along with Glenn Dennis and Max Littell, Walter Haut did something remarkable. He co-founded the International UFO Museum and Research Center in the heart of Roswell. He served as its president until 1996. That museum would go on to transform the entire economy of the town, drawing visitors from around the world. Here was the man who had spent his life saying nothing, now presiding over the very institution dedicated to keeping the question alive. It was as if a part of him needed to stay close to the truth, even while his lips remained sealed. And slowly, cautiously, he began to open a door. On May 14, 1993, Walter Haut signed his first formal affidavit, but this document was careful. It described only his administrative role, the drafting and distribution of the press release. It made no mention of any hangar, no craft, no bodies, and yet, even in that restrained statement, his true conviction began to leak out. He wrote, "I'm convinced that the material recovered was some type of craft from outer space." And he went further. He defended the men he had served with, the men who had been at the debris field, against the accusation that they had all simply been fooled by a balloon. He wrote of Colonel Blanchard and Major Marcel. There is no chance he would have mistaken it for a weather balloon. Neither is there any chance that Major Marcel would have been mistaken. That was the crack in the wall. a decorated officer, defending his commander's competence, insisting that trained military professionals at the world's only atomic bomb base could not possibly have mistaken ordinary weather equipment for a flying saucer. He was, in effect, telling the world that the retraction had never made sense, but he still stopped short. He still did not say what he had seen with his own eyes inside Building 84. And then came the researchers Tom Carey and Donald Schmitt. In the late 1990s, they began conducting long, patient, in-depth interviews with Walter Haut. They spent years earning his trust, listening, returning again and again. And gradually, in those conversations, the full story emerged, the story he had held on to since 1947. Which brings us to the most important day in this entire account, December 26th, 2002. On that day, Walter Haut sat down to sign a second affidavit, one drafted by Don Schmitt. But this was not like the careful document of 1993. This one held everything: the meeting, the debris on the table, the strange writing, and, at last, the hangar, the egg-shaped craft, the two small bodies beneath the cover, their oversized heads exposed. And he did not sign it alone. Present in the room were three people to witness it: his own daughter, Julie Schuster, a notary named Beverly Morgan, and an outside witness. This was done properly, formally, under notary seal, with people there to confirm that Walter Haut, of sound mind, put his name to these words. But there was one final condition, and it tells you everything about the kind of man he was. The affidavit was to remain sealed. It was not to be opened, not to be read, not to be published until after his death. He would give the world the truth, but only from beyond it. He would not spend his final years being interrogated, doubted, or paraded. He had kept his promise to Blanchard for as long as he lived, and so the document went into the dark, waiting. It did not have long to wait. On December 15, 2005, Walter G. Haut passed away at his home in Roswell, New Mexico. He was 83 years old, the bombardier who had flown 35 missions, who had dropped instruments over the atomic fire at Bikini Atoll, who had typed the most famous press release in the history of unexplained phenomena, was gone. And with him, the last living link to that morning meeting in July of 1947. And now, the seal could finally be broken. In June of 2007, the sealed 2002 affidavit was opened and published, appearing in the book Witness to Roswell, written by Tom Carey and Donald Schmitt. For the first time, the world could read, in Walter Haut's own signed words, the account he had carried in silence for 55 years. The craft, the bodies, the cover-up, the truth he had buried beneath a single sentence for the whole of his adult life. And the reaction was immediate, and it was intense. Those who saw the affidavit recognized it as the missing keystone of the entire Roswell case. Here, at last, was a first-hand insider, a credentialed military officer, a man of unimpeachable background, stating under oath that he had personally seen a recovered craft and non-human bodies. For those who had long believed something extraordinary happened at Roswell, this was the confession they had waited decades for, all the more powerful because Haut had chosen to reveal it only when he could no longer benefit from it. His daughter, Julie Schuster, had been in the room when her father signed the document, and she spoke of the burden he had carried for so many years, the lifelong weight of a promise of secrecy he had made to Colonel Blanchard. In her account, the affidavit was the release at long last of a secret he had been guarding, faithfully, for over half a century. It was a soldier finally allowed to lay down the heaviest thing he had ever carried. And this is where the story sits, still to this day. The testimony of a disciplined man, an honest man, a man of duty who did not chase attention and who, for the vast majority of his life, said as little as it was possible to say, until at the very end he set down everything he had witnessed. Let us stand back and look at the shape of what he described, because whatever you make of it, the outline is remarkable in its detail. He described a morning staff meeting attended by a brigadier general and the senior command of the world's only atomic bomb group. He described samples of wreckage passed around that table, foil thin as paper, yet impossible to tear, and beams marked with a strange pink and purple writing that no one could read. He described 2 separate crash sites, one to the northwest and one to the north. He described the weather balloon story as a deliberate cover-up, ordered from above to bury what had really been found. And these are not obscure inventions. Roger Ramey was a real man, the actual commander of the 8th Air Force, and it was Roger Ramey who really did stand before the press at Fort Worth on that day and present them with the balloon. William Blanchard was real too, and he did not fade into obscurity. He rose through the ranks to become a 4-star general and Vice Chief of Staff of the entire United States Air Force. These were not fringe figures. They were among the most senior officers in the American military. And at the center of it all, Haut placed himself inside Building 84, looking at an egg-shaped metal craft 12 to 15 feet long, with no wings, no windows, no landing gear, and beside it, 2 small bodies beneath a tarp with heads too large to be human. It is worth remembering, too, how little Walter Haut ever asked for himself. He did not go on television circuits proclaiming what he had seen. He did not sell a sensational story while he was alive to profit from it. He built a museum and quietly served as its president. He answered the door to the curious with the same flat sentence for decades. He signed the full truth only under the condition that it stay locked away until he was beyond reach. And when the document finally came out, it came out inside the pages of Witness to Roswell, published 2 years after he had already been laid to rest. If this was the act of a man seeking glory, then he chose the strangest possible path to it, one where he would never live to see a single moment of it. There is one more thing worth sitting with as we close. The dossier of his life reads like a study in reliability. A bombardier who flew 35 combat missions. A man handpicked for Operation Crossroads, trusted at Bikini Atoll with the most classified nuclear work the nation was conducting. A public information officer for the elite 509th. His entire career was a record of a man who followed orders, kept secrets, and could be counted on absolutely. And it was that same man who, at the very end of his life, chose to set down under oath the one secret he had carried the longest. What we are left with is the word of Walter Haut, sealed by his own hand, opened only after his death, and carried in silence for the whole of his life until then. A metallic egg in a guarded hangar. 2 small figures under a cover, their large heads exposed to the dim light, and a young lieutenant, ordered to walk out and tell the world one thing, while inside, he carried the memory of something else entirely for the rest of his life. He put out the press release, and, if his final words are to be believed, a great deal else besides. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share it with someone who loves a real mystery, and leave a comment below with what you believe Walter Haut truly saw inside Building 84. Keep your minds open, and until we meet again,